Bad takes on Ukraine, the legacy media continue to lie about the Freedom Convoy, and the antisocial yob guy thinks that conservatives are extreme. It's Fake News Friday. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. So we haven't really had a chance to get into the situation in Ukraine yet on the show. Maybe we'll do that next week. It looks pretty scary over there. The situation is pretty tense with Russia and Putin invading Ukraine. Boots are on the ground. There's explosions, there's bombing, lots and lots of scary scenes, lots of refugees fleeing, lots of fighters getting ready to engage in a conventional warfare, which we haven't seen in quite some time now. We're not going to focus in on the serious part of Ukraine. We're going to focus in on what you kind of have come to expect, right? So over the past 2 years during COVID, we have seen every single journalist in the world basically become an expert in public health, in epidemiology, and in COVID. Well, today and this week, what we saw is a lot of those experts on public health take off their public health expert hat and put on their foreign affairs expert hat and give us their sort of worst takes on Ukraine. And it is kind of amusing. So joining me for Fake News Friday today is True North producer Harrison Faulkner. Harrison's a journalist here at True North. Harrison, first of all, welcome to the show. Second of all, why don't you walk us through some of the worst tweets that we've seen so far on Ukraine?
Yeah, so just as you said, Candice, we've pulled some of these foreign policy expert tweets, and they are, as you expect, they are just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, we're going to go through a couple of them. This first one comes from Cenk Uygur, who's notorious for his bad takes. He's the head of the Young Turks, which is this left-wing progressive YouTube news channel. And he basically says that the right wing doesn't love Putin just because he's an authoritarian, tyrannical leader. They love him because he's a white authoritarian leader. Race has become more important than even nationality. They've turned on democracy and now even America in favor of a white warlord. So, of course, as you can see, Candice, they are already preparing for this to be a racial war and has nothing to do with Ukraine and Russia. Really, it just comes down to skin color.
Well, it's so absurd, Harrison. First of all, I follow a lot of Republicans, and most of them are condemning Putin pretty hard right now. Second to Cenk Uygur's position here, does he realize that Ukrainians are also white? The whole idea that people are rallying behind Putin because he's white sort of ignores the broader picture here, that this is a European war where both sides happen to have the same skin color. Anyway, I'll give it back to you.
Well, I mean, that's the nature of these tweets we've pulled, and you can just see exactly where this is going to be heading. Janelle Forsyth, who is a comm specialist for nonprofits and progressive causes, she writes, This isn't discussed much, but Putin very much benefits from white privilege. I just can't see a scenario in which a black or brown man running Russia would be allowed to invade Ukraine with no devastating consequences. White supremacy will destroy us. So one thing quickly, I agree with Janelle Forsyth that I can't really see a black or brown man running Russia as well. But also, if you were to look at Africa, for example, where warlords run those countries all the time, there is constant fighting and taking over of countries there all the time. It's a little ridiculous, and I think that this is, again, like I said, this is just what should be expected from some of these progressives on Twitter.
Well, not just that, Harrison, but it's like people who don't follow foreign affairs, people who have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to international relations. They're not observers of international conflict. But suddenly, when the news cycle switches to Ukraine, they're the expert. Trust them, and they're going to have some really insightful takes, as we can see here.
Well, and Candice, this next one is quite funny, and it leads to the point about how these public health experts who are now engaging in foreign policy, they haven't totally forgotten about public health. So this one is from Dana Hool, who is a U.S. leftist activist, and she writes, a lot of people in Ukraine crowding together inside. Only 35% of Ukrainians have been vaccinated. Less than 2 have been boosted. So again, the Ukrainians should be concerned about COVID. They should be concerned about their vaccination status, not too much about what's happening in Ukraine. Just an unbelievable take.
Yeah, forget about the bombs crashing down. Forget about the gunfire. The real threat, the real concern for everyone is still COVID. Don't forget that.
Yeah, maybe we should be sending them N95 masks instead of rifles to really protect them. And then this last one, which was horribly ratioed, from Stephen King, a fiction author. You've probably heard of him. He wrote on February 22nd, just about a day before Putin decided to invade Ukraine, he wrote, "Mr. Putin has made a serious miscalculation. He forgot he's no longer dealing with Mr. Trump." So immediately people jumped on this as probably one of the worst takes of this entire situation, basically saying that, oh, right, if Trump was still the president, Ukraine would have already been gone, apparently. But let's just remember, under Donald Trump, Putin didn't invade Ukraine. Under Donald Trump, China didn't invade Taiwan. All of the issues that we are seeing really popping off now under Biden weren't occurring. He basically went in and destroyed ISIS immediately, and then from that point on, every other authoritarian leader around the world recognized that Donald Trump was serious. He would have stopped them, and they didn't do anything. So I'm not really sure where this take is coming from, but this is coming from a fictional author. Let's just remember that.
Well, it's kind of just like Trump derangement. Like everything must have been worse if Trump was in office. Forgetting the reality, right? The truth of the matter is that Vladimir Putin invaded Georgia under George W. Bush when George W. Bush was president. He invaded Crimea in Ukraine when Barack Obama was president. He invaded nobody when Trump was president. So say what you will about Trump, Putin didn't invade another sovereign country under Trump. Here we have Joe Biden, and we see Putin invading Ukraine. So real life history and the facts are completely counter to a lot of this Trump derangement stuff. No wonder the tweet was ratioed, and for people who don't know, ratio just means that a whole bunch more people comment and sort of tell you that you're wrong versus very few people who like your tweet and share it with your audience. So yes, let's stick to your fiction writing, Mr. King. Well, aside from Ukraine and all the consternation and the hot takes over there, the media is still doing their best to try to demonize the Freedom Convoy, continuing to do Justin Trudeau's dirty work. Look, Harrison, I think that Justin Trudeau benefited greatly from the quick change in the news cycle this week, right? So he had the Emergency Act, he used it. He quickly got rid of it without really a lot of explanation, without really being held to account in the way that you would expect a Canadian Democratic leader to be held to account. A few hours after he announced that the Emergency Act was over, we got news that Putin was going ahead and invading Ukraine. We saw bombs, we saw troops, we saw the surge. And so because of that, everyone's focus immediately shifted to Ukraine. And again, Trudeau benefited from that because it helps him avoid the scrutiny of using the worst power grab in Canadian history. And so I hope that there will that the Conservative opposition, that courts, that judges, that lawyers will continue to expose Trudeau, to unearth the information, to help the people whose lives have been destroyed from having their bank accounts frozen. I hope there's accountability. I hope that we continue to get to the bottom of that. Trudeau has benefited. However, the media continue to do what the media does, which is lie and spread propaganda in favor of Justin Trudeau, trying to continue to smear the convoy, even though my guess is that most people who read the legacy media already have a negative view of the convoy. Regardless, they're continuing to do that dirty work. So there's a story over in Global, and a couple interesting points that I want to make about this story, Harrison. So the headline says, as Freedom Convoy leaves Ottawa, residents continue to look over their shoulders. So this idea that the people in Ottawa are so forever triggered from having a group of working class people protest in their city for 3 weeks that they're going to have like PTSD forever because of this, and the idea that they're going to have to look over their shoulders just in case there's a trucker or working class person in their community. So I'll read a little bit from this because it's quite amusing. It says, the blaring of truck horns, the sound of parties going into the wee hours of the night, a city under occupation was Jamie Sadgrove's reality for 3 weeks. Let me just make a quick point. I lived in Ottawa. It's a sleepy little town. Normal cities in the world. I've also lived in downtown Toronto. I spent time in some of the biggest cities in the world. Normal big cities have a bustling feel to them, right? The idea of horns honking in the middle of the night, people partying the wee hours, that's just sort of normal city life for most people. For people in Ottawa, it was like unbelievably jarring to the point where they refer to the people who are in their city as occupiers. And it was an occupation, a foreign occupation, sort of like what we're seeing in Kiev right now. It's just so silly to take a step back and to view it under this lens. But I'll continue reading. It says, but as the so-called freedom convoy in scare quotes, I've seen this in another global piece, Harrison, I think this must be their editorial position, that every time they refer to the freedom protest, they call it the so-called freedom convoy in scare quotes, so that you don't actually believe that they are fighting for freedom. That's just the scare quotes that they put in. So anyway, the freedom convoy vanished from downtown. Sadgrove is starting to see the spirit of a resilient city trickle back into the streets. Everyone seems to be in a better mood. I picked up on that in the streets as well. People smiling at each other, saying hi more often than I think they did before the convoy, and more people are wearing their masks outside now too. Hooray, congratulations. All of those horrible working class people are gone, and we're back to our sensible bureaucrat government town where we're so cautious that we even wear masks outside even though it's completely unnecessary. So congratulations, Ottawa. You're back to being a completely uptight, ridiculous city where people wear masks outside. Another person that they interviewed for this story, individual named Amanda Knox, who lives in Canada, Ontario. Okay, for folks not familiar with Ottawa, Canada is not in Ottawa. Canada is a suburb that is 45 minutes away from downtown Ottawa, 45 minutes away from where the convoy was. So keep that in mind as we read this account from Miss Knox here. She says, Monday was one of the few normal days they've had all year. Knox said that she would sleep a little better knowing the convoy had departed from the downtown core 45 minutes away, adding that all members of her family felt a little more at ease. It's good to have that quiet return to the city, said Knox, from her quiet suburb 45 minutes away from Ottawa. So I guess they're scraping the bottom of the barrel to put together this article, Harrison, where they couldn't find anyone in Ottawa to comment on it. So they went to someone who lived in a suburb 45 minutes away. You spent a bit of time in Ottawa during the convoy. How do you read a piece like this?
Well, two things. So on Amanda Knox's account of the noise, I stayed in two different hotels on the second weekend when the trucks were still there. The police hadn't cracked down violently on the protesters. So everything was basically the way it was the first weekend. The first hotel I stayed at was quite close to downtown, so I could hear some of the horns only when I woke up because they stopped blaring their horns at night. But the second hotel I stayed at was 10 minutes away from downtown, but it was still in Ottawa. I didn't hear anything, actually. I couldn't hear the downtown. I couldn't hear the trucks. So it's pretty hard to believe that in Canada Canada was reverberating with the sound of truck horns. I doubt that. But on the first account from Jamie Sadgrove, so he says that people are now smiling and waving at each other and saying hi. When I was there, I had never been a part of a group where more people were smiling, more people were happy to be there, and more people were waving, hugging, talking to people. It was actually one of the most refreshing things to be a part of, to see that kind of sense of community come together. I live in downtown Toronto. It is one of the most dull cities around. Everyone is miserable. Everyone has their head in their phone. No one is saying anything to anybody. So I just find it to be ridiculous. Obviously, that they're going to such great lengths to spin this. But again, it's global news. So
it's such a good point, Harrison. I heard that from so many people who were there. I unfortunately didn't make it down into Ottawa for these convoys, but I was following it very closely, and I was watching a lot of reporters, including our own, who were down there. And one of the things that so many people commented on was the festival, carnival-like atmosphere and how friendly everyone was. Even people who weren't necessarily in support at all. I remember reading a blog by Matt Gurney who was sort of saying that these people weren't his people. He didn't like them, but he still said that one of the things that was so notable to him was the eye contact and how people were smiling and friendly, and it was like unlike anything he had seen before. And to me, that's sort of like the difference between a small town and a city. When you're in a city, everyone keeps their head down, they keep to themselves, whereas when you're in a small town, people are friendly. People say hi to each other walking down the street even if you don't know each other, and that's just one of those major cultural divides. And it's like when all of these working class people came to Ottawa, they brought a little bit of their small town community to the city, and it was nice. I'm sure it was refreshing. So interesting point that you picked up on there. Well, that wasn't the only example of the media just really obsessing over the convoy and trying to paint it in the worst possible light. One of the things that I noticed throughout the convoy was that the media tried to really fixate on a small handful of people in the convoy. So basically what they did was they sifted through the convoy. They found the most egregious people possible. They picked out the biggest lunatics, the craziest people who were making the conspiracy theories, who were talking about how they wanted to overthrow the government, or who were making legitimately racist comments. And then they would hold these people up. The legacy media would hold these people up as if they were somehow the leaders of the convoy, or that their views represented everybody at the convoy, treating the convoy like a political party. The thing that the media fundamentally misunderstand, or perhaps they deliberately misinterpret because it makes the truckers look worse, is that the truckers are not a political party. It never was, right? It was a completely organic grassroots movement. There was word that a couple of truckers were going to do a slow roll from Vancouver. All of a sudden there was convoys all over the country, and they were putting together a sort of loosely organized, not a political organization, a protest movement, a group of people who were all coming together because they shared one view, which is that the government had overstepped, that their powers were being abused. They wanted their lives back, right? And so despite the true nature of the protest, which was that it was totally decentralized and organic, the media treated it like it was a top-down organized event where there was like a couple of brain trusts that were planning the whole thing. And so among that structure that the media invented, they found an individual called Pat King. Now, I pointed this out on Twitter. I'll make the point again. I follow a lot of people in the convoy. I follow it very closely. I follow a lot of conservatives. I have a lot of truckers in my feed constantly, and I'm reading what they're saying, and I'm hearing how they're communicating, and I'm watching them. And I never heard anybody talk about this individual, Pat King. I didn't hear anybody saying, go check out his videos. Let's show him support. I heard a lot of people talking about BJ Dichter. I heard a lot of people talking about Tamara Litch. I heard people talking about lots of other people who were involved. I didn't hear anyone talk about Pat King other than a small handful of journalists in the parliamentary press gallery, people in the legacy media who held him up and called him a leader. They called him a leader, and they pretended that his views represented the views of everyone else. I will just say, I find Pat King to be repulsive. I find his views to be awful. He seems to be a despicable, racist person. I've seen clips of him making egregious statements. I completely disagree with everything he's saying, and I believe that people in the convoy felt the same way, that as soon as they got to know this guy, they said, you need to stay away from us because you're poisonous and we don't agree with you. Go away. Regardless, the media loved to hold him up and call him a leader. So we saw that again this week because he apparently was arrested and he was in court. Worth noting that the lawyers that were representing a bunch of the other trucker convoy leaders refused to represent this guy because he's not part of their group at all. So this guy's on his own in court. Here's David Aiken of Global News saying, it's been a long 8 hours for Pat King in court. He's not able to speak. He's the center of attention, but he's not in the way he's accustomed to. As lawyers argue his fate, he's slumped forward, elbows on knees, head in his hands. Like, as if people care. I don't understand. They think he's this public figure when everyone in the trucker convoy has tried to distance himself from him. Likewise, the CBC had a story calling him the convoy leader. So it says convoy leader Pat King to hear bail decision Friday as woman puts up $50,000 in support. And they quote, of course, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which should be called the Anti-Hate Hoax Network because they have become infamous for pushing hate hoaxes. Regardless, it says we've tuned in for Pat King's bail hearing this morning, so you don't have to, and we'll be providing updates accordingly. Harrison, what's your take on this individual, Pat King, and why do you think the media are so obsessed with him?
Well, I think it's important to note, Candice, that, as you said, this was a decentralized operation, and there were a couple of different groups with some followings that were kind of taking the lead on the organizing of the truck movement itself. One of those groups had listed Pat King amongst a list of many other people who had a truck and had some responsibility per province. So the media immediately picked that up, and they listed him as a Alberta captain. So the media picked that up and said that he was the leader of this entire operation, knowing that wasn't the case. Now, I had the opportunity to join a press conference held by the organizers, including Tamara Litch, Ben Dichter, some of the other organizers, including Keith Wilson, their lawyer. In that press conference, they explicitly stated that Pat King was not an organizer of the event. He was not a part of their official organization that were the leaders of this group. But that didn't matter for the media because it was an easy target for them. He was an easy figure to latch onto because he had these posts that he put up on social media that live on, of course. And the media were able to take those and use it to smear the entire group. So I think it's important to note that even when the organizers of the event distanced themselves clearly from this individual, That doesn't matter to the media. They're not going to take that as any legitimate word. They're just going to believe what they want to believe and push what they want to push. So it's disappointing that this individual has tarnished this group. And that was clear that the organizers of this event knew that was going to happen, knew this person was going to be a target for the media, and they tried their best, but they weren't able to defeat the narrative being peddled by the legacy media on this one.
Well, they just insist on the fact that this guy's leader, even though everyone says obviously he's not. I think it's a good lesson for conservatives, however, because look, there are people out there who have horrible views, who are despicable racists, and it's important to police your own and to make sure that these people aren't able to latch onto your movement, aren't able to ride your coattails in order to promote their own, despicable worldview. And it's so important to loudly and clearly condemn people like that who wave Confederate flags and who talk about race in that way, that those people are just simply not welcome. And if you start talking about that stuff, you're going to get removed and basically just excommunicated by the community. I like to see conservatives do that more strongly. And of course, when it comes to the media, they're just the worst of the worst actors, such bad faith, pretending again that somehow this individual speaks for everyone is just such bad faith, and exactly what we've come to expect from the legacy media. Harrison, well, there's one more story I wanted to pick up on. This came out last Friday, and we didn't cover it on Fake News Friday, but look, Andrew Coyne, who is a columnist over at the Globe and Mail, he's sort of, he's an individual who goes on CBC and talks. He's sort of the quintessential Canadian Laurentian elite. Actually, he became infamous during this protest because he referred to the truckers as a group of antisocial yobs. Let's play that clip. We haven't played that clip on the show before. So this is Andrew Coyne, just so you get an idea who we're going to be talking about next year.
In many cases, they're not even truckers at all. They're basically a bunch of antisocial yobs with delusions of grandeur, a persecution complex, and too much time on their hands.
So a group of antisocial yobs with delusions of grandeur and a persecution complex. That's what he thinks about working class Canadians. Well, on the day that Justin Trudeau enacted the Emergency Act, the day that he unleashed it and the police were storming Ottawa and militarized the city and were moving in to remove the peaceful, unarmed protest, Andrew Coyne, who's a political affairs columnist, you'd think at a moment like that, watching the police move in on a group of peaceful protesters, watching the Prime Minister use an unprecedented power grab in the Emergencies Act, never been used before, hearing news of bank accounts being frozen, watching police brutality, you would think at that moment a political affairs columnist would choose to write a column on the actor that's leading this whole thing, the person who's causing the chaos, which was Justin Trudeau, talking about why he enacted the Emergency Act, talking about his position as leader of the party, the Liberal Party leading the country, how he mishandled it. There's so many things that you would expect a political affairs columnist to focus in on when it comes to the person leading the action. Instead, no, Andrew Coyne shifted his focus and decided to write a column demonizing conservatives. So he wrote a column that came out on February 18th saying, "How did conservatives become so attracted to extremism?" So I'm going to read a little bit here. Harrison, I'll let you react. So he writes this: "Conservatives who were once considered part of the mainstream." So first of all, he's saying that conservatives aren't mainstream anymore. Okay, buddy. Conservatives who were once part of the mainstream are spiraling down the same arc traced by Mr. Maxime Bernier, leader of the PPC party, and others. For 3 weeks, with the country's capital held hostage, the party's former leader, Andrew Scheer, its interim leader, Candice Bergen, and its probable future leader, Pierre Poilievre, have all openly sided with the hostage takers. Their rhetoric indistinguishable from Maxime Bernier. Okay, what do you think about that, Harrison?
Well, there's quite a lot to get into. I mean, the hostage takers, as Andrew Coyne calls them, who are armed with bouncy castles and hot tubs and food, really must have scared Andrew quite a lot. Now, here's the thing that I really don't understand. The conservatives, the mainstream conservatives, who he calls not mainstream, like Pierre Poilievre and Andrew Scheer and Candice Bergen, all they were doing was taking a very measured defense of Canadians' peaceful right to protest, because they have the ability to see past the politics. They know full well that once the Emergencies Act has been invoked on a peaceful protest like this, there's very little stopping it from being invoked on other people's right to protest. And unlike Andrew Coyne, these conservative leaders were taking a very measured response. They weren't freaking out. They weren't writing crazy posts on Twitter. All they were doing was basically saying, we defend the right for truckers to have their right to protest, as we do for everyone else in this country to do that. So I just think it's quite dangerous to see the shift happening where even the ability for mainstream politicians to defend the rights of working class people, defend their right to protest, that is seen as extreme. That's a bad direction we're heading in if that's where the so-called elite are now siding.
Well, it's just like, the perspective of a progressive who doesn't think that the Conservative Party should exist, doesn't think that conservatives should have a political platform, and thinks that the political Conservative Party should basically be a party of like red Tories who have sensible progressive values and maybe care a little bit more about balanced budgets or something like that. That's sort of where he's coming from. And this idea that like, how dare these conservative politicians, want to listen to the truckers? I was watching the Conservatives. I think that they were very measured. I don't think that they defended the truckers in as much as I would have liked to see them do. I don't think that they truly represented them. However, what they were saying was very moderate, saying these people have the right to protest. We should hear them out. That's basically, they condemned illegal blockades and they sided with law and order. Compare that to Maxime Bernier, who was much more, colorful in his language, much more likely to, use hyperbole in describing what Justin Trudeau was doing. I didn't see any of that from those conservative politicians. So Andrew Coyne is just wrong on the facts on that one. Let's continue here. Oh, because he takes a shot at journalists like you and I, Harrison, here at True North. So interesting. Now let's talk about what Andrew Coyne thinks about the media. So he says, right-wing opinion, formerly fragmented, now presents itself of something of a continuum, running all the way from Rebel News through True North to the Sun newspaper chain and, alas, the National Post. People you'd have thought would be able to spot a grift a mile away, instead have been enthralled by it, as if the half-witted bros in the convoy really were fighting for freedom and not providing cover for their anarcho-racist leaders. So Andrew Coyne falls into the same trap as David Akin and other journalists, pretending that this was, again, a top-down the top-down movement where the leaders of the convoy, they weren't actually working class people fighting for their freedom, Harrison. They were actually anarcho-racists who were trying to overthrow the government, I guess. And apparently the whole thing was a grift from day one, and people like you and I should have been smart enough to see through what he calls the half-witted bros in the convoy, as if calling them antisocial yobs wasn't bad enough. Now he's calling them half-witted bros. So again, this is Andrew Coyne, who is a very privileged elite who sees himself as being very, very insightful and intelligent, looking down his nose and scoffing at the intelligence of the truckers. That's great. That's very that's very good for class relations in Canada. And he's just bitter about the idea that there's this sort of new continuum of right-wing conservative media. So he much prefers that the Rebel be like isolated and far away, removed from the Conservative Party. Whereas now he sees this continuum. I'm flattered by this, that he says, look, there's the Rebel, then there's True North. The Rebels does its own thing, and it's not for everyone. It's its own flavor. Here at True North, we're a little different. We have our own flavor. And then same with over to the Sun newspapers and Post Media. Those two are kind of blurring together. I think that's fair to say that there's sort of different types of conservative news outlets. We all have our own flavor, and we're all influenced again by our own worldview and our own editorial position. Post Media takes money from the Trudeau government. We do not. And so, what he's really angry about, Harrison, is something that I'm really proud of. The fact that independent media like the Rebel, Ezra Levant, head of the Rebel, posted a couple of days ago that his channel has had over 100 million views in the last month. So many people are going to Rebel. They've had a lot of journalists and reporters on the ground filming and covering things that Legacy Media were just unable to cover. Here at True North, we've had similarly very, very good numbers, not quite that high, but still I'd wager that more people are reading True North than a lot of those Post Media newspapers. And it's great that people are getting their news from other sources, and that if you are a conservative, you don't have to be stuck with the National Post, which again is a big corporation that takes money from the Trudeau government and isn't always necessarily going to take the side of conservatism, especially when it's more of a populist or a Western Canadian movement. And so the thing that Andrew Coyne is most upset about, to me, is a great sign for the conservative movement, that we have more outlets, more voices, more opinions being expressed. What's your take on that?
Well, I think one thing to note is that at True North, we don't call Canadians half-witted bros and antisocial yobs. Most of those Canadians, we don't call Canadians that read our work that, and we don't call Canadians that don't read our work that. We actually we have a sense of respect for Canadians exercising their rights to protest. And clearly, this is really upsetting Andrew Coyne. And no wonder. I mean, luckily, at my role, I have the ability to see the data, the back end, the numbers on our site, and it's no surprise that our growth is catching the attention of these people who work for sinking ship legacy media outlets. It is a threat to their dominant control over the media. We are on the map now. We have seen incredible growth since this convoy began, and it's because Canadians are desperate for real coverage that isn't going to demonize them at every turn. And I think that's just the way this is all heading. Globe and Mail, the National Post, and some of these post-media newspapers aren't appealing to Canadians because they've taken this really nasty position on everyday Canadians who just want to have their right to protest, have their voice heard, and do it in frankly a fun way with bouncy castles and hot tubs. These are not half-witted antisocial yobs. And Andrew Coyne, if you've looked at any of his coverage, every time he does a CBC hit, he's doing it from his house. So clearly he's cooped up in his house, not talking to any of these people who he seems to think are half-wits, and is just firing shots from his basement at these Canadians. It's just disappointing to see, but clearly this whole convoy has really broken Andrew Coyne's spirit.
Totally. I want to read one more part of it because it's so interesting. So yeah, again, you have this elitist Laurentian elite guy sitting from his home. He appears in the Globe and Mail and on the CBC, and he's raging against what he calls a phony class war. So he says there's also a whiff of a class war in the air, a phony class war. But there you are. Conservative commentators have persuaded themselves, or at any rate would like to persuade others of the blockade participants, because some of them brought trucks, are genuine representatives of truckers as a group, or better yet, the working class. It's not remotely true. 90% of the working class are fully vaccinated at work, but it fits the populist conservative ambition of hiving off working class voters from the left, whom they accuse of being more concerned with racial and sexual identity politics than traditional working class issues. A lot to unpack there. First of all, that the idea that if you're fully vaccinated, that you're not part of the trucker convoy is a lie. It's wrong. It's objectively wrong. If you spent any time, as you did, Harrison, going and interviewing these truckers, or as I did, watching a lot of interviews, combing through a lot of footage, you will learn that a lot of the truckers were in fact fully vaccinated. The reason that they were there is because they want their freedoms back. They don't want to live in a two-tiered society. They don't like the mandates. They don't like the idea that people are being fired from their jobs. It was a point of principle, okay? So the idea that just because someone is vaccinated, therefore they can't be part of the convoy and the movement is just false. It's false. It's wrong. If he paid attention to what people are actually saying, he would understand that. And I understand as well. Look, I'm fully vaccinated and I vehemently oppose vaccine mandates. I think it is terrible for society and bad for the future of our country. So it's not a contradiction. And just by simply saying that someone's vaccinated, therefore they're not part of this group, is wrong on the surface. The broader point that he's making here, that it's a phony class war. Look, the idea that a bunch of people who work in the real world, who don't have the luxury to sit on Zoom all day, to work from their home, to be hived off from society because they can live in this virtual world, the people who actually have to get up every morning, get dressed, go out and face the world, COVID or not, regardless of the weather, these are the people who have had enough. It very, very much is a class distinction. And it's so obvious that it's not just conservative commentators who are making this point. I read a piece about it in the New York Times yesterday, the exact same thing. So many people are observing that this is a class distinction. In fact, Andrew Coyne wrote this piece last week. Later in the week, he was on CBC sort of admitting that it actually was a class distinction. So maybe he's come around on this point. But here, just the points that he's making are so wrong, so out of touch. And to me, again, just shows this sort of like bitter angriness that he has, that he's sort of losing his grip of power, because people are no longer looking to him as sort of the intellectual thought leader for conservatives. That's not who he is anymore. And he's so out of touch with the grassroots base of the Conservative Party that the Conservatives, they don't look to him. They don't care what he has to say. He's in a position of power, but he's losing that power, and he's angry that that power is slipping away.
Yeah, the guy who says that this isn't a class war is the same guy calling working class Canadians half-wits and antisocial yobs. I mean, how much clearer can it get? The person from the CBC and Globe and Mail basically attacking all of these people and looking down on them, is saying, oh, this is not a class war, this is not a class divide. Well, clearly it is. and Andrew wouldn't know that because he hadn't spent any time talking with any of these people. I wonder if he's even talked to a trucker in maybe in his whole life, because this kind of opinion is from the same kind of person that wouldn't even know a trucker if they walked past him on the street.
Oh, that's such a good point. And to the earlier point that somehow this is a continuum from Rebel to True North to Sun Papers all the way to National Post. One of the journalists who has been the strongest proponent and advocate for the working class and the truckers has been Rex Murphy, who writes for the National Post. He's probably the most prominent writer for the National Post. And it's because he grew up in a working class environment and he still goes out of his way to try to interact with the working class and people like truckers. So there's quite a distinction that you can see between a person who loves their country and cares about getting to know them and wants to hear from different people from different classes, Rex Murphy, and someone who's very isolated, very insular, very snobby, and sort of telling everybody else what to think, and that is Andrew Coyne. Well, it's no surprise, Harrison, that this came out. Polls show that trust in the media and the government are at an all-time low. So in 2022 so far, only 35% of Canadians say they trusted traditional media. It's down from 38% last year. My guess is that it has plummeted even more over the past weeks, seeing the way that the media has turned into essentially propagandists for the Trudeau government, repeating their lies that this was an occupation, that these protesters are extremists and Nazis and racists. And it's to so many people, it's just clear as day what the media is doing and how out of touch and untrustworthy they are. Well, Harrison, thank you so much for joining Fake News Friday. It's always fun to have you on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be on, Candice. Thank you.
All right, thanks for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.